Just after 11 o'clock at night, my phone rang. A police officer's voice came through the line. "Sir, we found your missing wife. She's alive. You need to come here immediately." I slowly lowered the phone and looked at the bed beside me. The woman I had been calling my wife for 8 months was still sleeping peacefully. My heart froze. If my wife was lying right there beside me, then who had the police found I didn't wake her? I drove there alone, and what I discovered changed everything I believed. Before we go further, I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Revenge Dad reaches people in every corner of the world, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's see how far this story travels. A quick note, some details in this story have been shaped for storytelling and educational purposes. Names and places are fictional, but everything this story teaches you is worth keeping. 16 hours before that phone call, the clock on the kitchen wall read 7:14 when Claire set the mug of tea in front of me. Steam curled up from the surface, pale and thin, in the November morning light. Outside, the maple tree in the backyard had shed its last leaves, and the yard looked like something forgotten, bare branches against a gray queen's sky. "Here you go, honey." The woman I knew as Claire Mitchell, the name she had given me on the morning after Evelyn disappeared, moved through my kitchen with the ease of someone who had long since decided it belonged to her. Her voice was warm, the way a greeting card is warm. The right words, the right tone, everything exactly where it was supposed to be. She set 3 small white tablets beside the mug without being asked. She never had to be asked anymore. "Your vitamins. Don't let them get cold along with the tea." I picked up the tablets and swallowed them one at a time, washing each one down with a sip. The tea was chamomile. It was always chamomile now. I used to drink black coffee 2 cups every morning, the first one in the kitchen and the second one out in my workshop with the radio on low. But Claire said coffee wasn't good for my blood pressure, and somewhere along the way, I had stopped arguing about it. I wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the photographs on the living room wall. There was one of her and me at Coney Island, both of us squinting into the sun, her hand on my arm, both of us smiling. I stared at it for a long moment. I could not remember that day. I could not remember the drive there, or what we ate, or whether the boardwalk had been crowded. The photograph existed, but the memory behind it did not. And that hollow feeling had become so familiar, I almost didn't notice it anymore. Almost. A knock at the front door made Claire's shoulders tighten just slightly before she turned to answer it. Rose Callahan stood on the front steps holding a small paper bag. 70 years old, if she was a day with silver hair cut short and eyes that had seen everything this block had to offer for the past 2 decades. She and Evelyn used to drink coffee together on Tuesday mornings. I remembered that much. "Morning, Claire." Rose's voice was pleasant, but her eyes moved past Claire, immediately searching for me at the kitchen table. When she found me, something shifted in her expression, something careful and concerned that she tucked away just as quickly as it appeared. "I made blueberry muffins. Thought Walter might enjoy some." "That's so thoughtful." Claire filled the doorway with her body without making it look deliberate. "He's resting right now, though. You know how mornings can be for him." "Of course." Rose's fingers tightened around the paper bag. "Could you just let him know I stopped by? I've been meaning to catch up with him." "Absolutely. I'll tell him you came." Claire accepted the bag with both hands and a smile that showed all her teeth. "Thank you, Rose. You're such a good neighbor." The door closed. I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen table and felt the old wood grain under my fingers, the same table I'd refinished 20 years ago, sanded down to bare wood and built back up with 3 coats of tung oil until it glowed. My hands still remembered how to do that kind of work, even when my head felt like it was wrapped in gauze. Claire came back to the kitchen and set the bag of muffins on the counter without opening it. "Rose again," she said lightly, turning to rinse a dish. "She and Evelyn were friends," I said. Claire's hands moved steadily under the water. "I know, sweetheart. She's just having a hard time letting go. It's natural." She turned off the tap and dried her hands. "Why don't you go spend some time in the workshop this afternoon? The fresh air will do you good." She said it like it was her idea, like everything was her idea. But the workshop was the one place I still felt like myself, so I didn't argue about that either. By 2 o'clock, I was sitting on the old wooden stool in the back, the space heater humming at my feet, my hands wrapped around a piece of white oak I had been meaning to finish for months. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil was so deep in the walls of that shop, It came out of the wood itself, 30 years of work soaked into every surface. I ran my thumb along the grain of the oak. Something stirred at the edge of my mind. Not a full memory, more like the outline of one. The sound of footsteps on the concrete floor. The smell of coffee mixing with sawdust. A voice saying my name from the doorway, the way someone says a name when they're happy to find you exactly where they expected you to be. I pressed my thumb harder against the wood and chased the outline. It dissolved before I could catch it. The watch Claire had given me sat there, a decent watch, silver-banded and reliable. I wore it every day. But sometimes I found myself turning my wrist over and looking at the back of it, running a finger across the smooth metal casing, searching for something I couldn't name. I didn't know why I kept doing that. The light through the workshop window had turned the pale orange of late afternoon when Claire appeared in the doorway, her cardigan pulled across her chest against the cold. "Walter, honey?" Her voice was as soft as it always was. "Come inside. It's getting cold out here." I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the way they always did these days. I set the piece of oak down on the workbench. My hand rested on it for a moment, the weight of the grain under my palm, the solidity of something real and unchanged. "Coming," I said. I followed her back across the yard toward the house. The kitchen light spilled out warm and yellow through the window. From somewhere down the block, a car radio played something I almost recognized. I climbed the back steps and went inside. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Claire's breathing settled into the slow rhythm of sleep beside me. The bedroom was dark, except for the red numbers on the clock, 10:47, 10:48. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain, the way it feels when you know you've forgotten something important and can't remember what it was. There was a name somewhere at the edge of my thoughts, a name that felt like home. I couldn't reach it. The clock on the nightstand read 11:02 when it began to ring. The phone rang 3 times before I got my hand around it. "Mr. Hayes." The voice on the other end was male steady, the kind of voice that had delivered bad news so many times it had learned to carry weight without breaking. "This is Officer Dennis Pratt with the Nassau County Police Department. I'm sorry to call at this hour. Are you the husband of Evelyn Hayes?" My fingers tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles ached. "Yes," I said. "I am. Sir, we've located a woman at a property in Hempstead, Long Island. She's been transported to Nassau County Medical Center. The identification we found at the scene matches the missing persons report, filed 8 months ago for an Evelyn Hayes of Queens." A pause, brief, careful. "Sir, she's alive. She's receiving medical attention right now." The room tilted. I sat up in bed and pressed my free hand flat against the mattress to steady myself. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. Alive. She was alive. 8 months and she was alive. And I had spent all that time believing that she had left, that she had walked away from 38 years without a word. "Mr. Hayes, are you still there?" "Yes." My voice came out thinner than I intended. "I'm here. We'd like you to come to the medical center as soon as possible. Detective James Caruso from the Queens Major Cases Unit has been notified and will meet you there with additional information. Do you have someone who can drive you, sir?" I looked across the bed. Claire was asleep on her side, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her breathing slow and even. The woman I had been calling my wife for 8 months. The woman who made my tea every morning and handed me 3 white tablets and told me coffee was bad for my blood pressure. Something cold moved through my chest. Not fear exactly, but something older and sharper than fear, an instinct. The same instinct that tells you to test the ice before you step on it. "I'll drive myself," I said quietly. "Thank you." I ended the call and set the phone face down on the nightstand. I did not wake Claire. I dressed in the dark, moving slowly, pulling on my flannel shirt and my wool trousers and my old brown jacket by feel and memory. My hands shook so badly I had to button the jacket twice. I found my keys on the hook by the back door and walked out into the November night without making a sound. The cold hit me like a wall. 38 degrees, the kind of Queens November cold that gets into your joints and stays there. I stood on the back steps for a moment and breathed in air that smelled like dead leaves and exhaust and the distant salt of Jamaica Bay. Real air. The kind Claire couldn't filter or control. I got in my truck and sat there for a full minute before I turned the key. My hands were still shaking. My eyes burned at the corners. Not quite tears. Something rawer than that. Something that hadn't found its shape yet. I pressed the heels of both hands against my eyes until the burning steadied. Then I started the engine and backed out of the driveway. I had not driven alone at night in 8 months. Claire always drove. Claire said my reaction time wasn't what it used to be, that it wasn't safe, that she didn't mind, that it was no trouble at all. But my hands remembered the wheel. My body remembered the route down Sutphin Boulevard toward the expressway. Some things I was beginning to understand go deeper than whatever was in that T. The Nassau County Medical Center was 40 minutes away on empty roads. I parked in the visitor lot and sat in the truck for another moment, both hands on the wheel, my breath fogging the windshield. Evelyn is alive. I said it out loud in the dark cab of the truck just to hear it, just to test whether it was real. Then I got out and went inside. Detective James Caruso was waiting for me near the information desk. A broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with the kind of face that had earned every one of its lines. Gray at the temples, dark eyes that were sharp even at midnight. A charcoal overcoat that had seen better decades. He extended his hand when he saw me coming and shook mine firmly. Mr. Hayes, James Caruso, Queens, major cases. His grip was solid grounding. I'm glad you came. How are you holding up? Tell me what happened. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Tell me everything. Caruso nodded and led me to a pair of chairs in a quiet alcove off the main corridor. He sat forward with his elbows on his knees, not the posture of a man reading from a report, but of a man who had been thinking about this conversation for a long time. A couple walking their dog in Hempstead found the property around 9 this evening, he said. Abandoned house, boarded windows, but there was light coming from the basement. They called it in. When officers arrived, they found your wife in a back room. She was dehydrated and weak, but conscious and communicative. He held my gaze steadily. She told officers her name immediately. She knew where she was and what had happened to her. She's been asking for you since they brought her in? My throat closed. I pressed my fist against my mouth and breathed through my nose until the pressure in my chest loosened enough to speak. 8 months, I managed. She's been there 8 months. That's what the evidence suggests, yes. Caruso reached into his coat and removed a manila folder. He opened it carefully and laid a photograph on the chair between us. Evelyn, taken by medical staff when she arrived. Hospital gown, an IV line in her arm, her silver hair longer than I remembered, thinner, tired in a way that went beyond sleep. But her face. Her face was exactly as I had known it for 38 years. My eyes filled. I pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose and squeezed hard, trying to hold back what was building behind my eyes, but my chin trembled and I couldn't stop it. A sound came out of me that I didn't recognize, low and broken, the sound of something that had been compressed for 8 months finally releasing. I thought she left, I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. I thought she walked away. I stopped, pressed my fist against my sternum where the ache was worst. Someone told me she left. Caruso watched me with those careful dark eyes. Mr. Hayes, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. He reached into the folder again and produced a folded piece of paper in a clear evidence sleeve. Do you recognize this? I took it and looked through the plastic. My own handwriting stared back at me. 2 pages front and back, dense and urgent. The pen had pressed hard into the paper, in places like the hand holding it had been afraid of being interrupted. I read the first line. If you are reading this, and I am not the one who gave it to you, then something has already gone very wrong. My hands began to shake again, a different kind of shaking than before, deeper, like something trembling from the inside out. I read another line, then another, words I had written and could not remember writing. Observations, dates, names. A description of 3 white tablets and chamomile tea and photographs that didn't look quite right. When did I send this? I asked. 7 months ago, Caruso said. About a month after your wife disappeared. It came to my precinct addressed to the detective on her missing persons case. He leaned forward slightly. Mr. Hayes, you wrote that letter when you still could, before whatever happened to you made that harder to do. The last line of the first page swam in front of my eyes. If I ever tell you the woman in my house is my wife, do not believe me. Her name is not my wife's name. Something is very wrong in this house, and I am running out of time to explain it. I lowered the letter to my lap. My chest heaved once, just once, and then I pressed my hand flat over my heart and held it there, feeling it pound against my palm, wild and off rhythm, and absolutely real. What happened to me? I asked. The words came out barely above a whisper. What did she do to me? Caruso's jaw tightened. He leaned forward and said, "That's what we're going to find out together, Mr. Hayes. But first, there's something else you need to know." He held my gaze. "The woman living in your house. Her name is not Claire Mitchell." I stared at Caruso and felt the floor shift under my feet, not literally, but the way it does when something you thought was solid turns out to be built on air. "What do you mean, her name isn't Claire Mitchell?" My voice came out, rough scraped clean of everything but the need to understand. "I've been calling her that for 8 months. Caruso leaned forward in his chair, his dark eyes steady on mine. "Her legal name is Sandra Briggs. She has a Florida driver's license, a Florida nursing license that was revoked in 2017, and an active federal inquiry connected to a case in Miami." He paused to let that land. "She's been using the name Claire Mitchell since she crossed into New York State approximately 9 months ago, 1 month before your wife disappeared." The hallway around us felt like it was narrowing. I pressed both hands flat on my thighs to keep them from shaking visibly and said, "Why didn't you come to the house? Why didn't you do something when you got my letters? Topwijk. Is ik spared. Ik heb koos." Caruso's jaw tightened. He reached into the folder and produced my letter again, still sealed in its evidence sleeve. "I want you to understand something, Mr. Hayes, because you deserve a straight answer." He set the letter on the chair between us. "When your letter arrived, I went to the precinct that handled your wife's missing persons case, and I read every note in their file. Then I drove past your house 3 times over the following 2 weeks. 3 times, I repeated. My throat felt like sandpaper. "The problem," Caruso said, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had lost sleep over this, "is that a letter is not evidence. It's a statement from a man who, according to his own son and the physician Sandra Briggs brought him to see, was experiencing significant cognitive decline." He held my gaze without flinching. "Under New York law, I cannot obtain a search warrant or make an arrest based on the written concern of someone who has been documented as having memory impairment. My hands were tied, Mr. Hayes. I kept the letter. I kept watching, but I needed something I could take to a judge." The anger that had started building in my chest ran up against the truth of what he was saying and lost some of its heat. I understood the law. I understood how it worked. I had just never imagined being on this side of it, the side where the law's caution cost you 8 months of your wife's life. "She brought me to her own doctor," I said, slowly working it out as I spoke. "She controlled what went into my file." "That's what it looks like?" Caruso said. "Yes." I picked up my letter and looked at it through the plastic sleeve. The handwriting was mine, the same tight, careful printing I'd used since woodshop class in 1976. I could see the places where the pen had pressed harder, where my hand had known it was running out of time. Then I read the line that made my throat close completely. "I don't know how much longer I'll be clear enough to write this. The tea makes everything foggy. If someone finds this, if I find this, please understand that I knew. I knew something was wrong. And I was afraid I wouldn't remember that I knew." My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my wrist against my mouth and breathed hard through my nose until the burning passed. "I wrote this when I still could," I said. "Yes." Caruso's voice was quiet. "And it's going to help us now." He closed the folder and looked at me directly. "Mr. Hayes, I need to ask you something important. Do you still have any personal items from before Sandra Briggs moved in? Anything she might not have touched?" Tom min besta. I thought about the workshop. I thought about the smell of linseed oil and sawdust. I thought about the way my hand kept reaching for the back of the silver watch Sandra had given me, running my thumb across the casing searching for something I couldn't name. Then I thought about the watch Evelyn had given me, the real one, the one with the inscription on the back. 20 years of finding each other, E. I was wearing it right now. I had worn it every single day without knowing why I couldn't take it off. My hand moved to my wrist. "I think," I said slowly, "I need to go to my workshop." Caruso looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Go, but Mr. Hayes." He stood and extended his hand again. When I shook it, he held on a half-second longer than necessary. "Be careful going back into that house. Don't let her see that anything has changed." I walked back through the hospital corridor toward the exit. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall behind a door I hadn't been taken to. Yet Evelyn was lying in a hospital bed, asking for me. I was going to get back to her, but first I needed to remember everything I had forgotten. The workshop smelled exactly the way it always had. Linseed oil and sawdust and the faint ghost of the cedar I'd worked with last spring, layered into the walls, the way years get layered into a person, one season pressing down on top of another until you can't separate them anymore. I stood in the doorway for a moment with my hand on the light switch and breathed it in, and for the first time in 8 months, something in my chest loosened without being asked. I pulled the string on the overhead light and went inside. The workbench was exactly as I'd left it months ago. The half-finished piece of white oak, my chisels lined up in their leather roll, the old transistor radio on the shelf above the window. Sandra never came out here. She said the smell gave her headaches. I had accepted that the way I had accepted everything else she told me, without examining it too closely, without pulling at the thread. I sat down on my stool and looked at the watch on my wrist, not the silver one Sandra had given me. I realized now, with the fog thinning from my mind with every breath of cold workshop air, that I had switched watches sometime in the past week without consciously deciding to. The watch on my wrist right now was older a Seiko, with a worn brown leather strap, and a face that had yellowed slightly at the edges. Evelyn had given it to me on our 20th anniversary. I remembered standing in our kitchen when she pressed the box into my hands, remembered the way she'd watched my face while I opened it. I turned my wrist over. On the back of the case, engraved in letters so small I had to tilt it toward the light. 20 years of finding each other, E. My throat tightened until it hurt. I had worn this watch every day without knowing why. I couldn't take it off. Sandra had given me the silver one, and I had worn that during the day dutifully, but this one I had kept, hidden in my workshop apparently, put on at some point and never taken off again. My hands had known something my mind had forgotten. I turned the watch over again and looked at the casing more carefully. The back plate sat slightly proud of the body, a hairline gap along one edge that shouldn't have been there on a watch this well made. I reached for the thin-bladed knife I used for detail work and slid it into the gap. The back plate came loose. Inside, wrapped in a small square of electrical tape, was a micro SD card no larger than my thumbnail. My hands were absolutely steady now. Steadier than they had been at the hospital, steadier than they had been in the truck. Something about being in this room, at this bench, doing this kind of careful, close work. My hands knew what they were doing, even when the rest of me did not. I kept an old digital recorder on the shelf above the radio. I used it to make notes about projects, measurements, wood grades, things I didn't want to forget. I found the adapter for the card in the drawer, where I kept my small tools and fitted the card into it and plugged it into the recorder. One audio file, no title. A date stamp from 8 months ago, 2 days after Evelyn disappeared. I pressed play. My own voice came out of the speaker, and the sound of it clear and urgent and absolutely lucid hit me somewhere behind the sternum like a closed fist. If you're hearing this, then part of you remembered even when the rest forgot. Good. Listen carefully. I gripped the edge of the workbench with both hands. Her name is Sandra. I don't know her last name yet, but Frank is looking into it. She came into this house through Daniel, and she has been putting something in my tea. I don't know what it is, but I know it's there, because on the days I don't finish the tea, I can think more clearly. I noticed 3 days ago, and I've been pouring it out when she's not looking. It doesn't clear fast. Whatever she's been giving me has had months to build up in my system. But every cup I don't finish is a cup closer to thinking straight. A sound in the background of the recording footsteps upstairs, moving toward the back of the house. My recorded voice dropped lower. I'm gonna hide this in Evelyn's watch because that's the one thing I know I'll never let go of. I've practiced opening the back plate twice this afternoon. My hands still know how to do close work even when my head doesn't. If I forget everything else, I won't forget that watch. Evelyn, if somehow you hear this, I never believed you left. Not for one day. Whatever they told me, whatever I might say, I never believed it. Then the footsteps stopped. A door opened somewhere above me, and Sandra's voice came through the recorder, clear and close, as if she had walked into a room directly above the workshop. Not knowing the recorder was running, not knowing the vent in the floor carried sound straight down. Marcus, it's moving faster than I expected. The confusion is setting in. By the time he's forgotten enough, the paperwork will be ready. A pause. The sound of her exhaling slowly, a sound I had heard 1,000 times across a breakfast table. No, he won't remember any of it. That's the entire point. The recording ended. I set the recorder down on the workbench and pressed both palms flat against the oak surface and leaned my weight into it. My arms shook. My eyes burned, and this time I did not fight it. 2 tears tracked down the side of my face, and I let them go because there was no one here to perform steadiness for. Then came the memory that broke everything open. Not a fragment this time, not an outline. The full thing, vivid and sharp and agonizing in its clarity. Evelyn standing at the door of this workshop on a Saturday morning, 8 months and 2 weeks ago, holding 2 mugs of coffee, her reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair. Walt. Her voice in my memory was careful in a way that made me look up from my work. That woman Daniel keeps mentioning. I think I've seen her before. There was a piece in the Florida Sun-Sentinel 2 years ago about an elderly man in Miami Herald Fenwick. He died, and all his money was gone, and there was a caregiver nobody could find afterward. She had set one of the mugs on the corner of my workbench and held the other with both hands. I think it's the same woman, Walt. I saved the article. I'm going to make some calls today. That was the last morning I had seen her face clearly. I straightened up from the workbench and wiped my face with the back of my hand. Outside the workshop window, the sky over Queens was beginning to lighten at the edges, that thin gray that comes before sunrise, the color of something, deciding whether to begin. I looked at the half-finished piece of white oak on the bench. Then I looked at the watch on my wrist. Then I took a long, slow breath and began to think about what came next. I was back in bed by 5:45. I had washed my face at the workshop sink, dried it on the old towel hanging by the door, and walked back across the yard in the dark with my hands in my pockets and my heart running at twice its normal speed. The bedroom was exactly as I had left it, Sandra breathing slowly on her side, the red numbers on the clock, the silver watch she had given me, sitting on the nightstand, where I always left it at night. I undressed quietly, got back under the covers, and lay on my back staring at the ceiling. I did not sleep, but I made my breathing slow, and even the way a man sleeps, and I kept it that way until the alarm on Sandra's phone went off at 6:30. She reached across and silenced it. Then she turned and looked at me, and for one suspended moment I felt her eyes on my face, like something physical, reading me, measuring me, checking the instrument to see if anything had shifted overnight. I let my eyes open slowly the way they do when sleep releases you reluctantly. I blinked twice, rubbed my face with one hand. "Morning," I said. My voice came out rough and slow. Perfect. Sandra's expression settled. "Morning, honey." She sat up and pushed her hair back. "How did you sleep deeply?" I said. I didn't even hear the alarm. She smiled at that, a small, satisfied smile she didn't know I was watching. Then she went to the bathroom, and I lay there with my eyes at the ceiling and my hands flat at my sides, and I thought 38 years. 38 years of marriage had taught me every variation of Evelyn's moods by the sound of her footsteps alone. Now I was going to use everything I had learned about reading people to convince a woman who made her living deceiving them. I got up and went downstairs. The tea was already steeping when I reached the kitchen. Sandra moved around the space with the easy confidence of someone who had long since decided it belonged to her, setting out the cup, opening the cabinet for the tablets, humming something low and tuneless under her breath. I sat down at the table and watched her and felt something cold and clear settle in the center of my chest. Not anger, not yet, but something harder than anger. Resolve. She set the mug in front of me, 3 white tablets beside it. I picked them up one at a time and pretended to swallow each one. The first went under my tongue. The second I palmed against my fingers. The third I got into my cheek. When Sandra turned to get the bread from the counter, I emptied all 3 into my jacket pocket and washed the nothing down with a sip of tea. Then I poured the rest of the tea into the pot of the fern by the window when she stepped into the hallway to check the thermostat. "I was thinking," I said when she came back, "I need to stop by the hardware store on Jamaica Avenue. I left an order ticket there last week for some new chisels. I keep forgetting to pick it up." Sandra looked at me. That measuring look, again briefer this time, more casual, but it was there. "Do you want me to drive you?" "It's 4 blocks, I said, and I put a small smile on my face. The smile of an old man gently asserting a small independence. "I think I can manage 4 blocks. She studied me for another half second. Then she nodded. "Don't be long. I'll have lunch ready by noon." "I won't be long," I said. Frank Delgado was already at the corner of Sutphin and Liberty when I got there, standing with his hands in the pockets of his gray overcoat and his collar turned up against the November wind. 67 years old, and he still had the posture of a man who expected trouble and had decided long ago not to mind it. 25 years with the NYPD will do that to a person. He looked at me when I came around the corner, and something moved across his face. relief I thought, and grief underneath it, and fury underneath that. "Walt!" He gripped my hand and held it. "God, you look thin." "I'm fine," I said, which was not entirely true, but was true enough for the moment. "Did you get my message?" "Last night. I've been up since." He fell into step beside me, and we walked slowly down the block the way two old men walk when they don't want to look like they're talking about anything important. "Tell me everything," I told him, "all of it. The phone call, the hospital Caruso, the letter I didn't remember writing the watch, the recording Sandra's voice coming through the vent in the workshop floor." I kept my voice low and even, and I watched his face while I talked. Frank's jaw tightened incrementally, with each piece of information, the way a vice tightens slow and deliberate and without any give. By the time I got to Sandra's voice on the recording, a vein had appeared at his temple that I had not seen since the last time someone had threatened his family. "I need you to find out who she really is," I said. "Everything. Her real name, where she came from, who Marcus is, all of it." Frank stopped walking. He turned to face me directly, and his dark eyes were absolutely serious. "I already started, Walt. I made 3 calls before I came here." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph, a Florida DMV record, a woman's face I knew in a context I didn't. "Her name is Sandra Briggs, and you need to hear what I found out about her before you go back into that house." My chest tightened. The wind off Jamaica Avenue cut right through my jacket. "Tell me," I said. Frank looked at me for a long moment, the look of a man deciding how much truth a person can absorb on a sidewalk in November. "Not here," he said. "Tonight, Murphy's Bar on Merrick Road, 8 o'clock. He put his phone away. "And Walt, whatever you do between now and then, don't let her see your eyes. The eyes are always the first thing that gives a person away." He turned and walked back the way he had come, hands in his pockets, unhurried, just another old man on a Queens sidewalk. I stood there for a moment, with the wind in my face and my hands curled into fists inside my jacket pockets. Then I went and bought a box of wood screws I didn't need, and I went home. Murphy's Bar on Merrick Road was the kind of place that had survived 4 decades in Queens by being exactly what it was and nothing more. Dark wood, low lighting, a jukebox in the corner that nobody used after 9 o'clock, and a bartender named Sal, who had perfected the art of not hearing conversations that weren't his business. Frank had been drinking here since before I knew him. He had the back corner booth permanently reserved in the way that regular customers do, not by any formal arrangement, but by the simple fact that nobody else ever sat there. He was already in the booth when I arrived, a glass of club soda in front of him, and a manila folder on the table that was thick enough to make my stomach drop when I saw it. I slid in across from him. Sal appeared, took my order for coffee without writing it down, and disappeared again. Frank opened the folder without preamble. "Sandra Marie Briggs," he said, turning the first page toward me. "Born 1979 in Tallahassee, Florida. Licensed registered nurse, state of Florida, 2004 through 2017. He tapped the page. "License revoked following an investigation into unauthorized prescription modifications." What that means in plain English is that she was changing patients' medication orders without authorization from their physicians. The board couldn't prove intent to harm, so she lost her license but avoided criminal charges. I wrapped both hands around the coffee mug Sal had set down. She was doing it then, even then. "It gets worse." Frank turned another page. 2021, Miami. A man named Harold Fenwick, 71 years old, retired postal worker widower. Sandra Briggs appeared in his life approximately 3 months after his wife passed. Presented herself as a private caregiver. Harold's daughter in Atlanta started noticing changes. Her father was confused on the phone, repeating himself, forgetting conversations they had had the day before. Frank's voice stayed level, but his jaw was working. Harold Fenwick died in October of 2021. Medical examiner listed cause of death as cardiac arrest, secondary to respiratory depression. His bank accounts had been drained in the 2 months prior. Sandra Briggs was gone before the daughter could get a lawyer. The coffee in my hands had gone from hot to warm without my noticing. I set it down carefully. "She killed him," I said. Frank met my eyes across the table. "The FBI field office in Miami opened an inquiry. They couldn't prove it was intentional. The medical examiner's findings were consistent with an accidental overdose of a sedative called lorazepam, which is a controlled substance, a benzodiazepine that causes memory impairment and respiratory problems at elevated doses." He paused. Walter, lorazepam in low doses administered consistently over weeks or months causes exactly the kind of gradual memory loss you've been experiencing. Confusion, difficulty retaining new information, gaps. I heard the words. I understood them, but hearing them applied to myself, hearing my own 8 months of fog named and categorized and explained by a specific drug with a specific mechanism did something to me that I had not prepared for. My hands started shaking again, not the fine tremor of cold or nerves, but something deeper, a shaking that started somewhere in my core and worked its way outward. She was doing it to me, I said. The words tasted like metal. Every morning, in the tea. We'll get a blood test that confirms it, Frank said. I've already spoken to Caruso about it. He's going to contact your doctor, Patricia Nolan, and arrange it through her office so Sandra doesn't know. He leaned forward. Walt, I need you to hear what I'm about to say. What Sandra Briggs did to Harold Fenwick and what she's doing to you, this is not a civil matter. Under New York Social Services Law, Section 473, the deliberate chemical impairment of an elderly person constitutes elder abuse. Combined with what happened to Evelyn, the fraudulent caregiver arrangement, and the connection to Harold Fenwick's death, Caruso can build a federal case. The offshore accounts will bring the FBI in under wire fraud statutes. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum and pushed, trying to relieve the pressure that had been building there since I walked in. How many others? Frank turned to the last pages of the folder. 3 confirmed prior cases in Georgia and South Carolina between 2018 and 2021. All elderly widowers, all lost significant assets. One of them, a man named Gerald Patterson in Savannah, is currently in a state-funded care facility with no resources left. He closed the folder. Sandra Briggs has been doing this for at least 7 years, Walt. You are not the first, but you are going to be the last. Somewhere behind us, a glass clinked against the bar. Sal moved without looking in our direction. Caruso didn't look up. Frank didn't either. I picked up my coffee and drank what was left of it, even though it had gone cold. My hands were steadier now, not because the shaking had passed, but because I had made a decision somewhere in the last 60 seconds that steadied me from the inside out. Who is Marcus? I asked. Frank reached into his coat pocket and produced a single printed sheet, a mugshot, and a record summary. Marcus Anthony Webb, 50 years old. Former notary public, Queens County, license revoked in 2014 following a conviction for falsifying real estate contracts. Served 14 months at Rikers. He slid the sheet across to me. He is currently operating a shell company out of a rented office in Midtown. Based on what you heard on that recording, he's been preparing fraudulent legal documents, a power of attorney, and a property deed transfer. If you sign a power of attorney giving Sandra control over your affairs, Marcus can complete the transfer of your home's title within 48 hours. I looked at the mugshot. The man in the clip from Rose's window, the one who had carried boxes out of my house in the dark and taken Evelyn's pictures off my walls. I had a name for him now. She found herself a lawyer, I said. A disbarred one, Frank said, which makes him more dangerous, not less. He has nothing left to lose. I set the sheet down on top of the folder and looked at my old friend across the scarred surface of the table. Frank's face in the low bar light was tired and angry and absolutely certain, and seeing that certainty in him shored something up in me that had been leaning for 8 months. I want to set a trap, I said. I want to let them think they've won. I want to be in the room when it ends. Frank studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slow and final, the way he used to nod in the old days when a plan had been decided, and all that remained was the doing of it. Then let's build it right, he said. We only get one shot at this. Outside on Merrick Road, a truck went by with its radio. Up loud, something with a driving bass line that rattled the bar window and faded into the distance. I gathered my jacket from the booth beside me and thought about Sandra at home, right now, humming to herself in my kitchen, entirely confident in a plan she had been executing without a single mistake for 8 months. She did not know that the man she thought she had erased was sitting in a bar booth on Merrick Road, remembering everything. Sandra had been encouraging me to take short walks for months. Fresh air, she said. Good for circulation, good for the mind. She would say it with that practiced warmth in her voice. And I had always nodded and gone when she suggested it, obedient as a man who has forgotten that he was once someone who made his own decisions. But that Saturday afternoon, when she mentioned she needed to run to the grocery store on Jamaica Avenue and wouldn't be back for a couple of hours, I told her I thought I'd take a walk while she was out. She looked at me with that brief measuring glance. Then she smiled. "Don't go too far, honey. Just around the block," I said. I waited until her car had turned the corner at the end of the street. Then I walked next door. Rose Callahan answered before I had finished knocking, which told me she had been watching from the front window. She was a small woman, 5 feet, and not much more, with silver hair cut close to her head, and the kind of dark eyes that record everything and forget nothing. She had lived in the house next to mine for 22 years. She and Evelyn had drunk coffee together on Tuesday mornings for most of that time. I had not had a real conversation with her in 8 months. She looked at me, standing on her front steps, and her eyes filled immediately. She pressed her lips together hard, fighting it back, and then she reached out and gripped my forearm with both hands. "Walter." Her voice was rough at the edges. "Come inside, quickly before she comes back." The house smelled like green tea and old books and something faintly floral that I associated so completely with Evelyn's Tuesday morning visits that my throat closed for a moment when I stepped through the door. Rose led me to the sitting room at the front of the house and sat across from me in a straight-back chair, her hands folded in her lap, her composure rebuilt with the kind of effort that left marks. "I called the police," she said, before I could say anything. "The week after Evelyn disappeared, I told them something was wrong. I told them that woman had been watching your house for 2 weeks before Evelyn was even gone, parking down the block, sitting in her car. I told them Evelyn wouldn't leave without saying goodbye to me." Her chin lifted. "They wrote it down and thanked me, and I never heard from them again." My chest ached. "I know," I said. "I believe you." Something in Rose's face shifted the relief of a person who has been disbelieved for a long time and has stopped expecting otherwise. She straightened in her chair and said, "How much do you remember, Walter?" "Most of it," I said. "It's coming back," she nodded slowly. "Then let me show you something." She stood and led me upstairs to the small room at the front of the house that she used as a sewing room. The window faced directly across to my property, the driveway, the garage, the path that ran along the side of the house to the backyard. It was, I realized, a perfect vantage point. Everything that happened on the exterior of my house was visible from this window. Rose opened the closet and took out a shoebox. Inside were 6 USB drives, each one labeled in her neat handwriting with a date range. She had been recording for 6 months. "I bought the camera the week after the police didn't call me back," she said simply. "I mounted it in the window frame, motion activated." She picked up the drive labeled with the earliest dates and handed it to me. "There's one night on here I think you need to see first." She connected it to the laptop on her sewing table and found the file without hesitation. She had clearly watched it many times. The footage was dark, slightly grainy the way night vision recording is, but clear enough. Timestamp in the corner, 2:47 in the morning, a Tuesday 4 months ago. 2 figures moving along the side of my house. The first was Sandra. I recognized the set of her shoulders and the way she moved, economical and purposeful. The second was a man, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this kind of work before. Marcus Webb. They were carrying boxes. I watched Marcus lift a framed photograph from under his arm and look at it briefly before sliding it into a garbage bag. Even in the grainy footage, I could see the frame, the silver one from the living room wall, the one that had held a photograph of Evelyn and me at our 35th anniversary dinner, the one that now held a photograph of Sandra and me at Coney Island that I had no memory of taking. My hands gripped the edge of the sewing table. "He comes every Tuesday," Rose said quietly. "For 6 months, always between 2 and 4 in the morning. They take things out and they bring things in." She paused. "One night I watched him carry in a box of picture frames, all different sizes. And I thought, who brings picture frames to someone's house at 3 in the morning? Someone who's replacing the ones already there," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, flat and controlled in a way that took effort. Rose turned to look at me directly. Her eyes were dry now, all the tears pressed back behind something harder and more useful. "There are 6 months of footage on those drives, Walter. I don't know what all of it shows, but I know what I saw with my own eyes, and I know what the camera recorded, and I know that your wife did not walk away from this house." Her voice cracked on the last word, just barely, just once, and then it steadied again. "Evelyn told me once that you were the most stubborn man she had ever loved. She meant it as a compliment." Something broke open in the center of my chest at the sound of Evelyn's name and Rose's voice, the particular way someone says the name of a person they love and miss and are afraid for. My eyes burned and I pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose and breathed through it until the burning passed. "She's alive," I said. "They found her last night. She's at Nassau County Medical Center." Rose made a sound I will not try to describe. She pressed both hands over her mouth, and her shoulders shook once hard, and then she pulled her hands down and gripped them together in her lap and said in a voice that was barely a whisper, "Thank God, thank God." I took the USB drives from the shoebox and put them in my jacket pocket. All 6 of them. "Rose," I said, "I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to not change anything. Don't call anyone. Don't let her know that you and I have spoken." I held her gaze. "We're almost at the end of this, but I need a few more days." Rose looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached out and gripped my forearm again the same way she had at the door, and she said, "Walter, I have been waiting 8 months. I can wait a few more days." I walked back across the yard in the thin afternoon light, 6 USB drives in my pocket and the image of Marcus Webb carrying Evelyn's picture frames into a garbage bag burning behind my eyes. The wind had picked up off the bay. It smelled like winter coming. Daniel arrived at 8:30, the way he sometimes did on Saturday evenings, a bottle of wine under his arm, his keys still in his hand, the particular restless energy of a man who could not sit still in his own apartment, but hadn't yet figured out where else to be. He was 38 years old, and he had his mother's eyes and my jawline and a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was uncomfortable that he had carried since he was 12. I was sitting in the armchair in the living room when he came in. I had been sitting there for 2 hours doing what I had been doing all day, watching Sandra move through my house with the confidence of ownership, listening to the particular way she answered Daniel's questions about me cataloging everything. My hands rested on the arms of the chair. My face did what it had been doing since Friday morning. "Hey, Dad." Daniel bent and kissed the top of my head, the way he had started doing in the past few months, the way you kiss someone who is fragile. "How are you feeling?" "Good," I said. "Tired, but good." He looked at Sandra over my head, a quick glance that passed between them like a signal. Sandra smiled and went to the kitchen to open the wine, and Daniel sat on the couch across from me and asked me about the workshop, about whether I had been sleeping about, whether I wanted to watch the game later. All the questions a good son asks, all delivered in the careful tone of a man managing something he didn't want to look at directly. I answered everything slowly the way I had been answering things for months, and I watched my son's face and felt something I had no clean name for: grief and fury, and a love so old and stubborn it refused to curdle no matter what it was shown. Sandra brought the wine. We sat together for an hour, the 3 of us, and I watched them without letting them see me watch. The way Sandra touched Daniel's arm when she refilled his glass. The way he didn't quite meet her eyes when she did his. The small current of something unspoken that ran between them and that I now understood completely. At 9:30, I told them I was tired and going to bed. Sandra stood immediately to help me up. I waved her off gently the way a man does when he wants to preserve some dignity and made my way down the hall. I heard them settle back into the living room behind me, the murmur of the television, the quiet sounds of the house at night. I did not go to bed. I changed into my flannel shirt in the dark bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress and waited. 20 minutes. 30. The television went off. Footsteps moved to the kitchen. 2 voices low. I moved into the hallway in my socks, staying close to the wall where the floorboards didn't creak. 30 years in this house had taught me every board that would betray me. The kitchen light made a yellow rectangle on the hallway floor. I stopped 6 feet from the doorway and stood absolutely still. Sandra's voice low and precise. "He's been more alert this week. I noticed it yesterday." The way he looked at me when he came back from his walk. Daniel's voice tighter than I had ever heard it. "You said this would be wrapped up by now. Marcus needs the signature on the power of attorney before he can move on the deed transfer. Your father has been stalling." A pause. The sound of liquid being poured. "I've been adjusting the dosage. It'll be done within the week." Adjusting the dosage. Daniel repeated the words the way you repeat something you heard wrong and are hoping you did. "Sandra, it's fine. He won't remember any discomfort. He never does." Her voice carried the flat certainty of someone discussing a logistical problem. "The memory care facility in Forest Hills has a room available. Once the transfer is complete, we move him there, and that's the end of it." A long moment. The refrigerator hummed. I pressed my back against the hallway wall and breathed through my nose, slow and deliberate. and kept my hands flat against the plaster to stop them from doing what they wanted to do. And the house, Daniel's voice had dropped further. The money from the sale, it split as agreed, 60-40. Sandra's voice was smooth, practiced. You get your share within 30 days of closing. That clears your debt entirely and leaves you with enough to start over somewhere. Daniel exhaled a long, uneven sound that told me everything about what he had been carrying. She really just left. His voice went strange on the question. My mother just walked away. I tried her cell a dozen times the first month. It just rang. She changed her number, Sandra said smoothly. She told me she needed a clean break. I didn't think it was my place to push her. People do, Sandra said, especially when a marriage has run its course. She told me herself she'd been unhappy for years. My son made a sound in the kitchen, then low and wounded the sound of someone absorbing a pain they had decided to deserve, and I stood in the hallway with my hand pressed flat over my heart and felt something inside me that I had no words for. Because I understood in that moment exactly what Sandra had done to Daniel. She had not bought his silence with money alone. She had first broken something in him, his belief in his mother, in his family, in the version of his life that had been real, and then she had offered him the money as a way to stop feeling the break. He did not know Evelyn was alive. He did not know his mother had been held in a basement in Hempstead for 8 months asking for her family. He knew none of it, and Sandra had made sure of that. When does Marcus come? Daniel asked. Tuesday, Sandra said. He'll have everything ready. We just need your father in the right state of mind. Her voice shifted a small adjustment, almost imperceptible. The tea takes care of that. I pushed off the wall and walked back down the hallway to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and I looked at my hands. The carpenter's hands, the hands that had built and repaired and restored things for 40 years. And I thought about Daniel at 7 years old, climbing into the workshop on a Saturday morning, and asking if he could help sand something his small face so earnest and serious, so hungry to be useful. And I thought about Evelyn in a hospital bed on Long Island asking for her family. My eyes burned until they overflowed. I pressed the back of my wrist against my mouth and held it there until the shaking in my chest subsided. Then I pulled my hand away and straightened my back and looked at the dark ceiling of the bedroom I had slept in for 30 years. The anger was there. It was enormous, and it was clean, and it was completely under control. I was not going to waste it. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and typed a message to Frank. She's adjusting the dosage. Tuesday is the deadline. We move before then. I sent it and set the phone face down and lay back on the bed with my hands folded on my chest. Down the hall, I heard Daniel say goodnight to Sandra. I heard him pause outside the bedroom door for a moment, just a moment, and then I heard his footsteps continue to the front door and the quiet click of the latch behind him. I lay in the dark and I thought about forgiveness, about what it costs, about whether the price changes depending on what a person knew and what they only thought they knew. I did not have an answer, but I knew that whatever came next, I needed Daniel on the right side of it. Before I go any further, I now know the truth. I have the recording. I know exactly who Sandra really is, and I'm about to make a decision that will change everything. If you're still with me right now, drop the number 9 in the comments. Just that 9. It tells me you're here, and it tells me this story is reaching you the way I hoped it would. One thing before we continue, the next part of this story contains some dramatized elements built for storytelling and educational purposes. If that's not something you'd like to hear, this is a good place to step away and find content that suits you better. Sunday mornings in the workshop had been a ritual for most of my adult life. Not because I always had work to do, but because there was something about the quality of Sunday morning light through that north-facing window flat and honest without the angle that made everything look better than it was that helped me think. Evelyn had understood that. She would bring me coffee at 7 and leave me to it until 10, and in 38 years, she had never once come back before I was ready. I sat on my stool in the thin winter light, with the piece of white oak across my knees and my hands moving on it, without my mind directing them the way they did when they knew what the work needed better than I did. The wood was close to finished now. A few more hours and it would be done. I thought about Daniel. I thought about the sound he had made in the kitchen the night before, that low, wounded exhalation, the sound of a man accepting a pain he thought he deserved. I thought about what Sandra had built inside him before she ever asked for anything, a story in which his mother was the one who had failed, who had run, who had chosen to leave. A story designed to hollow out his loyalty before she needed to fill the space with something else. He had not known. I was more certain of that now than I had been at midnight when the anger was loudest. Daniel had been lied to as completely as I had, just by different means. The difference was that he had chosen not to look too closely at the lie, and that choice had a cost. But it was not the same cost as Sandra's. I set the oak down on the bench and went inside to tell Sandra I had a doctor's appointment. She looked up from the kitchen counter. "Dr. Nolan, I thought that wasn't until next week." "She moved it up," I said. "Called Friday while you were out. Something about wanting to check my blood work before the holidays." I put a mild confusion into my voice, the kind that had become my most reliable tool. I wrote it down somewhere. Sandra studied me for a moment. Her eyes moved to the small notepad by the telephone, the one she had been using to track my appointments for months. It was blank for today, but she could not say with certainty that she hadn't missed a call. That uncertainty was exactly what I was counting on. "I can drive you," she said. "Patricia's office is 6 blocks away," I said. "I've been walking there since 1994. I picked up my jacket from the hook. "I'll be back by noon." Dr. Patricia Nolan's office on Hillside Avenue had the particular organized calm of a practice that had been in the same location for 20 years. The same watercolor prints on the walls, the same slightly outdated magazines in the waiting room, the same woman at the front desk who knew every patient by name. Patricia herself was 50 years old, silver-streaked hair, pulled back reading glasses on a chain around her neck, with the direct gaze of someone who had spent 2 decades learning to hear what patients weren't saying. She met me in the back hallway rather than the examination room. Frank was already there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Caruso stood beside him in his charcoal overcoat, a coffee cup in one hand and the focused stillness of a man running through a checklist in his head. Patricia gripped my hand when she saw me, both of hers around mine, firm and warm. "Walter," her voice was tight, "I should have caught this. When she started bringing you in with those new prescriptions from doctors, I had no record of I should have pushed harder. I filed a query with the prescribing physician listed and got back a response that seemed legitimate, and She stopped. Her jaw worked. "I should have pushed harder. Patricia." I kept my hand in hers. "You're here now. That's what matters." She pressed her lips together and nodded once, and then she was back to business in the way that good doctors are, feeling the feeling and then setting it aside because there was work to do. "Here is what I need you to understand about what I'm going to do," she said, leading us into a small consultation room and closing the door. "I'm going to draw blood today, under the pretense of routine end-of-year blood work. Walter, that's a visit Sandra can verify. If she calls the office, my receptionist will confirm it." She set her bag on the table and began laying out equipment with practiced efficiency. "I'm going to flag the sample as a priority submission to the toxicology lab at NYU Langone Medical Center under Detective Caruso's case number. That flags it in the system as an active criminal investigation." Caruso leaned forward, "Which means it goes to the front of the queue. Turnaround on a stat toxicology panel at NYU Langone is 6 to 8 hours when it's law enforcement flagged. We'll have results by tonight." "What are you testing for, specifically?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I needed to hear it said plainly. "Ilorazepam primarily," she said, sliding the needle into the vein at the inside of my elbow, with the clean precision of long practice. Frank was right about what it does. What I can tell you that he couldn't is what the blood will show and what that means in a courtroom. She paused, her eyes meeting mine over the blood draw. "The effect is cumulative. Months of low-dose exposure means the concentration in your blood right now will be unmistakable to any toxicologist. This isn't a case anyone can explain away." "And a blood test will show it?" I asked. "Lorazepam and its metabolites remain detectable in blood for up to 72 hours after the last dose," she said. "Given that you've been receiving it daily for months, the concentration in your blood right now should be unmistakable." She withdrew the needle and pressed a cotton ball to the inside of my arm. "Hold that for a moment." I held it, looked at the ceiling, thought about chamomile tea and 3 white tablets every morning for 8 months. Caruso set his coffee cup down on the table. "When the results come back, I take them to the DA's office along with the recording from the workshop, Rose Callahan's footage, and the missing persons file on Evelyn. That gives us elder abuse by chemical means under New York Social Services Law, Section 473, kidnapping in the first degree under New York Penal Law, Section 135.25, and conspiracy to commit fraud." He held my gaze. Combined with the federal wire fraud exposure from the offshore accounts, the FBI field office in Manhattan will want in. This stops being a Queens case and becomes a federal case. Which means Sandra Briggs has nowhere to go, Frank said. Not in this country, Caruso said, and we'll have Interpol flagged before she could get out of JFK. I lowered my arm and looked at the three of them, Patricia with her equipment, Frank with his stillness, Caruso with his checklist running behind his eyes. Three people who had chosen to stand in a small consultation room on a Sunday morning and help an old man get his wife back. My throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. I want to be the one in the room when it ends, I said. I've said this to Caruso already. I'm saying it to all of you now. I want to be sitting across from her when she realizes it's over. Frank looked at Caruso. Caruso looked at me. Tuesday, Caruso said. Marcus Webb is bringing the documents Tuesday. We let them set up. We let her put the papers on the table. He paused. And then it ends the way it should end, with her looking at the man she spent 8 months trying to erase. I nodded. Outside on Hillside Avenue, the Sunday morning traffic was light. A church 2 blocks over was ringing its bells for the 9 o'clock service, the sound carrying clean and clear in the cold air. I buttoned my jacket and walked back toward home, and I thought about Tuesday, and I thought about Evelyn in that hospital bed, and I thought about the piece of white oak on my workbench that was almost finished. Almost. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from a number I didn't recognize, 11 digits the area code for a prepaid phone. I stopped on the sidewalk and read it. 4 words, I know you remember. My thumb hovered over the screen. I stared at the number. The last 4 digits nagged at something in the back of my mind, a sequence I had dialed many times, from many different phones over the course of many years. Daniel's old cell number, the one before he switched carriers 2 years ago. I put the phone in my pocket and kept walking. My son was testing the ice before he stepped on it, just like I had taught him. Sandra told me at lunch that a friend was coming by that afternoon to help with some paperwork. She said it the way she said most things, warmly, casually, as if it were the most natural arrangement in the world. Just some routine documents, honey, things we should have gotten in order a long time ago. Marcus is very good at explaining everything in plain language. You'll like him. I looked up from my soup. Marcus, an old friend, he works in financial planning. She refilled my water glass, without being asked the way she always did. The small gestures of care that had taken me 8 months to understand were not care at all. He's helped a lot of people in situations like ours. I nodded slowly and went back to my soup. That sounds fine, I said. It was the hardest 2 words I had said all week. Marcus Webb arrived at 2 o'clock in a dark blue sedan that he parked with the precision of a man who measured everything. I watched him from the living room window as he came up the front walk, broad shoulders, silver haircut, close a charcoal suit that fit well enough to have cost real money. He carried a black leather attaché case in one hand and walked with the unhurried confidence of someone who expected doors to open for him. I recognized him immediately. The shoulders, the way he moved, the man from Rose's footage carrying Evelyn's picture frames into a garbage bag at 2:47 in the morning. I was sitting in the armchair when Sandra let him in. Walter? He crossed the room and extended his hand, his smile calibrated to exactly the right degree of warmth, not too familiar, not too formal. His grip was firm. Sandra has told me so much about you. It's good to finally meet. Good to meet you too, I said, and I shook his hand and looked him in the eye and gave him the slightly unfocused gaze I had been perfecting for 4 days. He sat on the couch across from me and set the attaché case on the coffee table and opened it with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this many times in many living rooms. Inside a neat stack of documents, a notary seal on a mechanical press, 2 ballpoint pens. Walter, what I have here is a standard statutory short-form power of attorney, he said, his voice settling into the smooth register of someone delivering a prepared explanation. Under New York general obligations law, this document authorizes Sandra to manage your financial and legal affairs on your behalf. It's a protective instrument. It means that if there are ever decisions that need to be made quickly, Sandra has the legal authority to act without needing to wait for you. He slid the top document across the coffee table toward me. Nothing changes about your life. Sandra is already doing most of this in practice. This simply makes it official. I picked up the document and held it in both hands and made a show of reading it slowly. My eyes moved across the lines of legal text, but what I was actually doing was buying time and memorizing faces, the slight tightening around Marcus's eyes when I turned to page 2, the way Sandra had positioned herself just off to my left, close enough to touch my arm if I hesitated. The notary seal on the press caught my eye. I leaned forward slightly to look at it. Marcus Webb's notary commission had been revoked in 2014. Caruso had told me that, and told me to look at the name on the seal if I got the chance. The name embossed on that seal belonged to someone else, a licensed notary whose credentials Marcus had obtained legally or otherwise, and was using without authorization. Under New York Penal Law, Section 170.15, falsifying a notarized document with another person's seal was a felony. Every document in that case would be void. At this part here, I said, pointing to the signature line on page 3. What exactly does this authorize? Marcus leaned forward. That's the principal signature line. Once you sign there, Sandra has full authority to. And this seal. I touched the notary press lightly with one finger. Is this from your office? A fraction of a pause, less than a second. Yes, he said, fully certified and current. I nodded as though satisfied and set the document back on the table. Could I have a glass of water? I asked Sandra. My throat is dry. Sandra stood immediately. The moment she left the room, I slid my phone from my jacket pocket, angled it below the arm of the chair, and took a photograph of Marcus Webb's face. Clear, direct, well lit by the afternoon window. I sent it to Caruso with 3 words. He's here now. The response came back in 11 seconds. Confirmed. Marcus Anthony Webb. Stay calm. Do not sign. I put the phone away before Sandra returned with the water. Thank you, I said, and drank half of it slowly, while Marcus watched me with the patience of a man who had learned that patience was the most important tool in his kit. He began walking me through the document again from the beginning. I asked the same questions I had asked the first time, in slightly different words. Sandra answered some of them for me, her voice gentle and reassuring, her hand resting on my forearm. Marcus answered others, his voice never losing its practiced calm. I was watching his hands. His left hand rested on the attaché case. His right hand held a pen, loosely rotating it between his fingers, the small, rhythmic motion of someone managing impatience. After 20 minutes, he stopped rotating the pen. Walter, he said, and his voice had shifted, still professional, but with a new directness underneath it. I want to be honest with you. Sandra has been managing your affairs informally for quite some time now. This document simply protects her legally for the work she's already doing. He set the pen down on top of the documents. All we need is your signature on page 3, and we can have you finished in 5 minutes. Sandra's hand tightened slightly on my forearm. Just slightly. I picked up the pen. I turned it over in my fingers, the way a man does when he's considering something. Then I set it back down and looked up at Marcus with the mild, apologetic expression I had been building toward for the past half hour. I'm sorry, I said. My hand is shaking today. It does that sometimes in the afternoon. I held up my right hand and let it tremble. I had been holding it steady for so long that the release felt almost real. Could we do this tomorrow? I want to be sure my signature is legible. Marcus's left hand pressed flat on the attaché case. A muscle in his jaw moved. Of course, he said. His voice remained smooth. Tomorrow is fine. He began gathering the documents. I heard him say something low to Sandra as she walked him to the door. I caught only the last few words. Tomorrow morning. Tell him it's urgent. We can't keep pushing this. Sandra's voice equally low. I know. I'll take care of it. The front door closed. I sat in the armchair with the untouched pen still on the coffee table in front of me and listened to Sandra's footsteps come back down the hallway. She appeared in the living room doorway, her smile rebuilt to its usual warmth, her composure absolutely intact. He's very helpful, isn't he? She said. Very, I agreed. She picked up the pen and the documents and took them to the desk in the corner, and I watched her hands as she stacked them neatly. And I thought about the name on that notary seal that wasn't Marcus Webb's name, and I thought about the documents that were going to be used in a court of law. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, a message from Caruso. Results from NYU Langone in 2 hours. Warrant request is drafted. Tomorrow we move. I left the phone in my pocket and looked at the coffee table where the documents had been, and I thought about tomorrow, and I thought about Evelyn, and I thought about the way 38 years of marriage leaves a shape inside a person that nothing else can fill. Outside the living room window, the afternoon light had gone the deep gold of late November. the kind of light that makes everything look like it's already a memory. Tomorrow, I thought. Murphy's bar was quieter on Monday nights. Sal had the television above the bar tuned to a game nobody was watching, and the four of us had the back booth entirely to ourselves. Caruso had arrived first and ordered coffee. Frank had a club soda. Patricia Nolan sat beside me, with her coat still on her hands, wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched, and her eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent the afternoon doing difficult things carefully. She had the results. She set a folded printout on the table between us, without ceremony. NYU Langoni ran the panel at priority. Lorazepam was present at a concentration consistent with daily low-dose administration over a period of several months. She pressed one finger against the page. Walter, the level in your blood right now is not high enough to be acutely dangerous. That's deliberate. Whoever has been administering this knew exactly what they were doing. Low and consistent. Enough to impair memory formation and judgment without triggering any obvious symptoms that might send you to an emergency room. My throat tightened. I looked at the number on the printout. It meant nothing to me in clinical terms, but the fact of it, the proof of it sitting on a table in a bar in Queens, made my hands curl into fists on my thighs. Is that enough? I asked Caruso. Combined with everything else, yes. Caruso opened his own folder, thicker now than it had been at the hospital 2 nights ago. I submitted the warrant request to the Queens County DA's office this afternoon. Chemical elder abuse under New York Social Services Law. Section 473. Kidnapping in the first degree under penal law. Section 135.25. Conspiracy to commit fraud, first degree. And because the offshore accounts involve wire transfers crossing international lines, I've notified the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan. They're coming in under federal wire fraud statutes, 18 United States Code, Section 1343. He looked at me steadily. The warrants will be signed by morning. Frank leaned forward, which means we move tomorrow. Tomorrow, Caruso confirmed. Marcus Webb told Sandra he needed the documents signed tomorrow morning. We let that meeting happen. We let them set up in the living room, let Marcus put the papers on the table. He paused. And then we take them. Patricia's hands tightened around her mug. What do you need from me tomorrow? Nothing, Caruso said. You've done everything we needed. Stay near your phone. He looked at me. Frank will be at the back of the house by 9:30. My team covers the front and both sides. Walter, you sit in that chair, you let Marcus run his presentation, and you wait for the signal. What's the signal? I asked. Frank almost smiled. You'll know it when it happens. I nodded. I looked around the table at Patricia's tired eyes, at Frank's steady hands, at Caruso's organized certainty, and I felt something expand in my chest that I had not felt in 8 months. Not hope exactly. Something older and more durable than hope. The feeling of a thing being set right. One more thing, I said. Daniel sent me a message today, his old number. I told them what it said. I think he's trying to find a way back. Caruso studied me. Do you trust him? I thought about the sound Daniel had made in the kitchen the night before, the wounded exhalation of a man absorbing a lie he had chosen to believe. I trust that he didn't know about his mother, I said. Whether that's enough, I don't know yet, but I think when tomorrow comes, he'll make the right choice. Caruso nodded slowly. If he does, if he comes to us with something useful, it helps him in court, substantially. He closed his folder. But we don't count on it. We don't need it. I know, I said. I'm not counting on it. I'm just leaving the door open. Frank put his hand on the table between us, palm down, the way he used to do at the end of a briefing in the old days, a gesture that meant we have what we need. Now we go do the work. I put my hand over his. I held it there for a moment and felt the weight of everything we had built over the past 4 days, the recording in the workshop. Rose's 6 USB drives, Patricia's blood panel, Caruso's warrant, Frank's phone calls made before sunrise on a Saturday morning. Each piece had seemed small on its own. Together, they had become something solid enough to stand on. Walk me through exactly how tomorrow works, I said, from my side. Caruso looked up. He set his pen down on the folder and leaned back slightly the way a man does when he shifts from collecting information to delivering it. You wake up at your normal time. You go through your normal morning. Sandra gives you the tea and the tablets. You do what you've been doing. You don't take them. You don't finish the tea. The fern by the window, I said. The Fernan, he confirmed, and something in his expression acknowledged, without quite becoming a smile, that a Fern in Queens had been quietly absorbing evidence for 4 days. Marcus is confirmed for 10 o'clock. Sandra will want you calm and settled before he arrives. Let her manage that. Let her believe she's managing it. And when he arrives, you sit in your chair. You let him open the case. You let him put the documents on the table and walk you through them the way he did yesterday. Caruso's voice was measured and deliberate, the voice of a man who had run through this sequence many times before coming here tonight. You pick up the pen, you look at page 3, and then you wait. He held my gaze. When the door opens, you'll know it's time. Patricia spoke from beside me, her voice quiet. Walter, there's something I want to say before tomorrow. She had not touched her tea. She had not taken off her coat. She looked at me across the table with the expression of a person who had been carrying a weight for long enough that setting it down required deliberate effort. When she started bringing you in with those new prescription records, the ones from physicians I had no prior record of, I filed an inquiry. I waited for a response. The response I received was formatted correctly and signed by a licensed physician, and I accepted it. She stopped. Her jaw worked once. I should not have accepted it. I should have made a phone call to that physician's office directly. I should have pushed until I reached a human being who could confirm it in person. Her eyes were steady on mine. I didn't, and I am going to carry that. The bar was quiet around us. Sal moved behind the counter without looking in our direction. The television above him showed a game in the 4th quarter, the score tight, nobody watching. Patricia, I said, let me finish. Her voice did not waver. What I can do now, what I am going to do, is make certain that every piece of clinical evidence in that blood panel is documented in a way that leaves no room for a defense attorney to question it. The chain of custody on that sample is clean. The lab report is flagged under Caruso's case number. The prescribing physician Sandra used will be contacted by the DA's office this week, and when investigators compare their records to the documents she presented at my office, the discrepancies will be clear. She pressed her hand flat on the table. She used my office as part of what she built around you. I intend to be part of what takes it apart. The 3 of us, Frank, Caruso, and I, were quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind came off the bay again and pushed against the bar windows, and the glass held. Thank you, I said. It was not enough. It was what I had. Patricia nodded once briskly and finally picked up her mug of tea. It had gone cold, but she drank from it anyway. Caruso gathered his folder. There is one more thing you need to understand going into tomorrow, Mr. Hayes. He set the folder flat on the table and looked at me directly. When we come through that door, Sandra Briggs is going to look at you. She is going to understand in that moment that everything she spent 8 months building has been dismantled, and she is going to look at the person she believes she dismantled to do it. He paused. How you handle that moment is up to you, but I want you to know it's coming. I thought about Sandra's face across the breakfast table every morning for 8 months, the warmth in her voice, the 3 white tablets lined up beside the tea, the way she had stood in Rose's doorway and filled it with her body without making it look deliberate. I've been thinking about it since Friday night, I said. I'll be ready. Caruso closed the folder and stood. He extended his hand and I shook it, and his grip was the same as it had been in the hospital hallway, solid and grounding, the grip of a man who understood that some things needed to be made physical to be believed. 9:30, he said. We'll be in position before you're out of the kitchen. He left first, his charcoal overcoat disappearing through the bar's front door, into the November dark. Patricia stood and pulled on her coat and said goodnight to Frank, and then to me, and her hand on my arm when she passed was brief and firm, and said everything she had already said in better words. Frank and I sat alone in the back booth. The jukebox in the corner woke up on its own, the way it occasionally did, a few bars of something low and brass-weighted that faded before it fully started. Caruso didn't look up. Frank didn't either. You holding up? Frank asked. His voice had dropped to its quieter register, not the voice he used for briefings, but the one he kept for the space between them. I'm holding up, I said. He studied me for a moment, with those dark eyes that had seen everything this city had to offer for 25 years and had stopped being surprised by most of it. Then he nodded. She's asking for you every day, he said. Evelyn, Caruso called the medical center this afternoon to update the duty nurse. She asked if you were coming tomorrow. My throat closed. Tell them yes, I said. Tell them after 10 o'clock I'll be on my way. Frank put some money on the table, and we slid out of the booth. Outside on Merrick Road, a cold wind had picked up off the bay and was rattling the bar windows in their frames. Tomorrow, the temperature was supposed to drop into the 20s, the coldest night of the year so far. I buttoned my coat and walked back out into it. When I got home, Sandra was reading in the living room. She looked up and smiled. "How was dinner?" "Good," I said. "Frank sends his regards." She nodded and went back to her book, and I hung up my coat and went down the hall toward the bedroom. And I thought about the warrant being signed in the morning, and I thought about Evelyn's face in that hospital photograph, and I thought about 8 months of chamomile tea and what it felt like to finally be on the other side of all of it. I thought about Patricia's hand pressing flat on the table. I thought about Caruso's folder growing thicker. I thought about Frank's palm turned down on the scarred wood and my own hand covering it. I thought about 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I thought about Evelyn asking if I was coming. I slept better that night than I had in a long time. Tuesday arrived gray and cold, the kind of Queen's morning, where the sky sits low and flat over the rooftops, and the light never quite gets started. I had been awake since 5. Not the restless, foggy wakefulness of the past 8 months, the kind that left me staring at a ceiling I couldn't name, reaching for thoughts that dissolved before I could hold them. This was different. This was the wakefulness of a man who knows exactly what day it is and exactly what it is going to ask of him. I lay still in the dark with my hands flat on the blanket, and I breathed slowly, and I let the silence of the house tell me what I needed to know. Sandra's breathing beside me was slow and even, untroubled. The breathing of a woman who believed today was the day everything she had spent 8 months building would finally pay out the signature, the transfer the clean and quiet end of Walter Raymond Hayes as a problem to be managed. She did not know that 5 people were already in motion. I dressed in the dark the way I had learned to dress in this house over 30 years, by feel and memory, without switching on a light, without making a sound. Flannel shirt, wool trousers, the old brown jacket from the hook behind the door. I found my watch on the nightstand and fastened it on my wrist without looking at it. And I walked out of the bedroom and down the hallway in my socks, staying close to the wall where the floorboards held their silence. The kitchen was cold and dark. I did not turn on the overhead light. I filled the kettle by feel and set it on the burner and stood at the window while it heated, looking out at the backyard in the pre-dawn gray, the bare maple, the workshop with its dark windows, the frost on the grass catching what little light came over the neighbor's fence. I thought about Frank awake at this hour, already running through the sequence in his head, the way he always had before an operation. Not because he doubted the plan, but because the habit of preparation was what kept a man from being surprised. I thought about Caruso, his folder thicker now than it had been 4 days ago, in a hospital corridor. Everything in it clean and documented and ready for a judge. I thought about Patricia Nolan, who had pressed her hand flat on a bar table in Queens and said she used my office as part of what she built around you, and I intend to be part of what takes it apart. I thought about Daniel parked 2 streets over in the dark, his phone in his hand. The kettle began to whistle. I lifted it before it got loud and poured the water over the coffee grounds and stood there in the gray kitchen light with both hands wrapped around the mug, feeling the warmth move into my palms and up through my wrists. And I thought, this is the last morning. After today, the house would smell like itself again. After today, I could drive to Long Island and walk through a door and say her name out loud in the same room where she could hear it. I drank the coffee slowly standing at the window, and I watched the sky over Queens begin its gradual decision to become morning, that thin gray, at the edges of things that comes before the light commits. A bird started somewhere down the block. A car moved past on the street out front without slowing. The clock on the kitchen wall read 6:58. In 13 minutes, there would be a knock at the front door. I rinsed my mug and set it in the rack and walked back down the hallway toward the sound of Sandra still sleeping, and I stood outside the bedroom door for a moment, with my hand not quite touching the wood. 8 months, I thought. Then I went to wait by the front door. The knock came at 7:12 in the morning. Sandra was still asleep. I had been awake since 5, lying in the dark, with my eyes open and my hands flat on the blanket, running through everything one last time. The way you check your tools before a long job. Not because you doubt them, but because the habit of checking is what keeps you from being surprised. I got to the door before the second knock. Daniel stood on the front steps in yesterday's clothes, his jacket unzipped despite the cold, his hair uncombed. His face had the gray hollowed look of a man who had not slept and had spent the hours doing something worse than sleeping, thinking. His eyes found mine, and something in them fractured open the way ice cracks when the weight on it finally exceeds what it can hold. "Dad!" His voice came out barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I stepped back from the door. "Come in." I took him to the kitchen, the furthest room from the bedroom. I closed the door behind us, and we sat across from each other at the old table, the one I had refinished 20 years ago, the one that had held 38 years of family breakfasts and arguments and homework, and the particular comfortable silence of people who know each other well enough not to fill every moment with words. Daniel put his phone on the table between us. His hands were shaking. "2 nights ago," he said, keeping his voice low, "I was going through an email thread I share with Marcus for the property documents. He sent me a file by mistake. I don't think he realized it was attached." He turned the phone so I could see the screen. "Dad, it's a life insurance policy, taken out 3 weeks ago." His jaw tightened until I could see the muscle working. "My name is on it, as the insured." He pressed his finger against the screen. "And her name is the beneficiary, $400,000. I looked at the document on the screen. The signature on the insured line was Daniel's name in Daniel's handwriting, except that Daniel had not signed it. The pen pressure was wrong. The loop on the D was wrong. I had looked at my son's signature on birthday cards and school reports and holiday checks for 38 years. "She forged it," I said. Daniel's chin dropped to his chest. His shoulders heaved once a single convulsive movement, and then he pressed both hands flat on the table and pushed himself back upright. And when he raised his face, his eyes were red and wet, but his jaw was set. "There's more," he said. His voice had steadied into something harder. "Same email thread, another attachment Marcus sent without realizing." He swiped to the next document on his phone. Offshore account information, Cayman Islands Bank, account numbers, routing codes, transaction history going back 4 years. He looked at me directly. "Dad, there are 5 names in this transaction history, 5 people before you. I recognized one of them from a news story 2 years ago. A man in Savannah who lost everything." His voice cracked on the last word and then came back stronger. "She was never going to give me anything. I was just the door she needed to walk through." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, the backyard was gray with early morning light, the maple tree standing bare and still. I reached across the table, and I put my hand over both of his. His hands were cold. They were shaking badly, the deep, uncontrolled trembling of someone whose body has been running on adrenaline and self-recrimination for hours. He looked down at my hand over his, and his face did something complicated and painful that I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror at 3 o'clock in the morning. "Dad," his voice broke completely. "I didn't know about Mom. I swear to God I didn't know. She told me, she said Mom had been unhappy for years, that she'd met someone that she didn't want to." He stopped, pressed his lips together hard. "I should have called Mom. I should have tried to reach her. I believed her because I didn't want to." He stopped again, his throat working. "I know," I said. "I chose the money." The words came out raw and direct the way a person speaks when they have run out of the energy required to soften a truth. I knew something was wrong, and I chose not to look at it because I needed the money, and I was ashamed of needing it, and Daniel. I tightened my hand over his until the trembling slowed. "Your mother is alive." He stared at me. "She's at Nassau County Medical Center," I said. "They found her 4 days ago. She's been asking for us." The sound Daniel made then was not something I will try to put into words. It started somewhere deep in his chest and came up through his throat, and his hands turned under mine and gripped them back so hard it hurt, and I let it hurt, because some pain is right and necessary, and this was both. He bent over the table, his forehead nearly touching it, his shoulders shaking, and I kept both hands over his, and I did not say anything else for a long moment, because there was nothing else to say that mattered as much as just being there. When he finally raised his head, his face was wet, and his eyes were swollen, but something in them had cleared the particular clarity that comes after a person has cried themselves down to the truth of something. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. I looked at my son, 38 years old, and his mother's eyes, and a mistake he was going to spend a long time making right. But he was here. He had come. "Call Detective Caruso," I said. "Tell him everything. The insurance document at the offshore file, all of it." I held his gaze. "And then I need you to be here at 10 o'clock. I need you to walk into that living room with me." Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand, nodded once. "Okay," he said. Okay, Dad. Outside, the morning was getting lighter. In 2 hours and 48 minutes, Marcus Webb was going to knock on my front door. I got up and put the kettle on. Sandra came downstairs at 8:15 and found me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the newspaper, which was what I did on mornings when nothing was wrong. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep past 6, I said. "Old habit." She made herself tea and sat across from me, and we ate breakfast together in the ordinary way that had become our routine. And I watched her over the top of the newspaper and thought about how completely she believed in what today was going to be, the last signature, the end of 8 months of careful patient work. She had no reason to believe otherwise. Daniel had left at 7:45 before Sandra came down. I had walked him to the back door, and he had gripped my arm for a moment before he went. Not a hug, not words. Just the pressure of his hand on my arm, telling me something that neither of us had the language for yet. Then he was gone, and I had sat back down at the kitchen table and picked up the newspaper and waited. At 9:15, I went to the workshop. I stood at the bench and looked at the finished piece of white oak. The linseed oil had cured overnight, and the surface had deepened to a warm amber, the grain running clean and clear from one end to the other. I ran my thumb along it one last time. Then I went back inside and sat in my armchair. Marcus arrived at 9:58. 2 minutes early, the punctuality of a man for whom this was a transaction to be completed efficiently. Sandra let him in, and he came through to the living room with his attaché case and the particular settled confidence of someone who believed the hard part was already done. "Walter." He set the case on the coffee table and opened it. "Good morning. How are you feeling today?" "Better than yesterday," I said. "The hand is steadier." "Good." He arranged the documents on the table with practiced efficiency power of attorney on top deed transfer, beneath it 2 pens aligned parallel to the stack. "We'll get you taken care of quickly. 20 minutes and you'll be done." Sandra settled onto the arm of the couch near my chair, close enough to touch my shoulder if needed. Marcus sat across from me and began his explanation in the same words, in the same order, the presentation he had delivered in living rooms like this one for years. I listened and nodded and held my hands loosely in my lap. At 9:59, I knew Caruso's team had taken their positions. Frank was at the back door, 3 officers on the front approach, 2 more covering the side gate. Daniel was parked 2 houses down the block, his phone open to Caruso's number. The warrants were signed, the evidence was documented. The only thing left was the moment itself. Marcus slid the power of attorney across the coffee table toward me. He set a pen on top of it. "Page 3. He said. "Signature line at the bottom." I picked up the document. I turned to page 3. The signature line sat at the bottom of the page beneath 4 paragraphs of dense legal language. Above it, in the space marked "Principal," my name had been typed in capital letters. Walter Raymond Hayes. All I had to do was write my name beneath it, and 38 years of building a life with Evelyn would belong to the woman sitting on the arm of the couch beside me. I picked up the pen. Sandra's hand came to rest lightly on my shoulder. "That's it, honey," she said softly. "Just your name." The pen touched the paper. The front door opened. Not a knock. The door simply opened the way it does when someone has a key, or when someone has been given one, and Daniel walked in from the front hallway and came through to the living room doorway and stood there with his phone in his hand and his jaw set and his eyes carrying everything he had cried out at 7 o'clock this morning and rebuilt into something harder and more useful. Sandra's hand left my shoulder. Marcus looked up from the documents. Daniel looked at Sandra. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the pen in my hand and the document beneath it and the careful tableau they had arranged around his father in his own living room. Then he crossed to the coffee table and set his phone down on top of the power of attorney screen facing up. The screen showed a document, account numbers, routing codes, transaction history across 4 years and 5 names. And a password 12 characters alphanumeric that Caruso had confirmed that morning gave federal investigators full access to the offshore accounts at the Cayman Islands Bank, where Sandra and Marcus had moved the money of everyone they had taken it from. Daniel looked at Sandra and he said 2 words. "I'm done." Sandra's face did not change for 1 full second. Then her eyes went to the phone on the table and the color left her face the way heat leaves a room when a window is opened in winter, all at once, completely leaving something flat and cold behind. She moved toward the phone. Daniel stepped between her and the table. "Don't," he said. Marcus Webb stood up. His eyes went to the hallway, the kitchen at the back of the house, the automatic calculation of a man assessing exits. He picked up his attaché case. The back door opened. Frank Delgado's voice level and certain. "Put the case down, Mr. Webb." The front door opened. Detective James Caruso walked into the living room with 2 officers behind him, their badges visible, their movements unhurried and absolutely final. He looked at Sandra. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Daniel, standing between Sandra and the phone with his feet planted and his hands at his sides. Then he looked at me, still sitting in my armchair with the pen in my hand and the unsigned document on the table in front of me. I set the pen down. Sandra Marie Briggs. Caruso said, his voice carrying the particular weight of words that have been prepared and are now being delivered at the exact right moment. "Marcus Anthony Webb, you are under arrest." He began to read them their rights. Marcus set his attaché case down on the floor. The last of his composure left him in a long, slow exhalation, the sound of a man understanding that the exit he had been looking for was not there. An officer moved to his side. Sandra stood in the center of my living room and looked at the phone on the coffee table, and at Daniel, and at Caruso, and at the officers, and the expression on her face in that moment was something I had never seen from her in 8 months. Not warmth, not calculation, not practiced sympathy. Just the bare face of someone who has run out of versions of themselves to present. She looked at me. I looked back at her, and I did not look away. The room had gone very still. Caruso's officers had Marcus Webb by the arm near the hallway. Marcus was not struggling. He had the deflated look of a man who had run the numbers and understood the outcome. His attaché case sat on the floor where Frank had told him to put it, and he stared at a point on the wall above my head with the expression of someone who had already begun the process of deciding what to say to his attorney. Daniel stood by the coffee table with his arms at his sides and his jaw tight, watching Sandra the way you watch something you are afraid of and have decided to stop being afraid of. Sandra stood in the center of the room, with an officer on each side and her wrists in handcuffs and her eyes on me. I stood up from the armchair, not quickly. The way a man stands up after a long day of careful work, deliberate, unhurried, feeling his age in his knees and not minding it. I set the unsigned document on the coffee table as I rose, the pen I left on the arm of the chair. I walked to where Sandra stood and I stopped 3 feet in front of her. Up close without the performance between us, her face was just a face. 45 years old and tired in a way that went deeper than the morning. The warmth she had worn for 8 months was gone, not stripped away dramatically, but simply oscient the way a coat is absent when you take it off and hang it by the door. Underneath it, she looked like what she was, a woman who had been running for a very long time. "You were faking," she said. Her voice was low. It was not quite a question. I looked at her for a moment before I answered. I thought about the chamomile tea every morning. I thought about the 3 white tablets. I thought about Evelyn's photograph being slid into a garbage bag at 2:47 in the morning while I slept 30 feet away. I thought about 8 months of believing a lie that had been built around me one careful piece at a time, the way bad framing gets built into a house, invisible, until the whole structure starts to lean. "I may have forgotten many things, Sandra," I said, "but I never forgot the woman I married." Something moved across her face, not remorse exactly, but something in the neighborhood of it. A recognition. The look of someone who has heard a true thing said plainly and cannot find a way around it. Her chin dropped toward her chest, one sharp breath in, one out. Then Caruso touched her elbow, and the moment was over. He guided her toward the door, and she went without resistance, her shoulders straight, her face composed again, in the way of a person who has decided that composure is the last thing they have left to control. At the threshold, she stopped, not long, just a beat, and said, without turning, "I did what I had to do." I watched her back. "So did I?" said. Then she was gone, and Marcus was gone behind her, and Frank appeared from the back hallway and stood in the kitchen doorway with his hands in his pockets and looked at me with the face of a man who has seen a long job through to its end. Daniel made a sound beside me, low and unsteady, the sound of a man exhaling something he has been holding for too long. His hand found my arm and gripped it. "Is it over?" he asked. "It's over," I said. Caruso came back through from the front of the house. His coat straightened his expression, settling into the quieter register of aftermath. He stopped in the living room doorway and looked at me. "She's been asking for you since Friday morning," he said. "Your wife." My throat closed. "Long Island?" I asked. He nodded. "Whenever you're ready." I looked around the living room, my living room with its 30 years of accumulated ordinary life. The the chair I had sat in 10,000 times the table I had built with my own hands, the walls that had held Evelyn's photographs, until someone came in the night and took them down. I picked up my jacket from the hook by the door. "I'm ready now," I said. The drive to Long Island took 40 minutes. Caruso offered to take me, but I asked Frank instead, and Frank drove the way he did everything without commentary, without unnecessary words, keeping his eyes on the road, and leaving the space beside him open for whatever I needed it to be. I needed it to be quiet. I sat in the passenger seat of his old Buick and watched Queens give way to the expressway, and the expressway give way to Nassau County, and I held the watch on my wrist, with my other hand, my thumb running back and forth across the engraving on the back, the way it had been doing for 8 months without my knowing why. 20 years of finding each other, E. We were about to add one more time to that count. Frank pulled into the visitor lot at Nassau County Medical Center and parked and turned off the engine. He sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. "You want company?" he asked. "No," I said. "Thank you, Frank." He nodded. "I'll be here." I got out of the car and walked through the sliding doors into the hospital's warmth and followed the signs to the 3rd floor without stopping at the desk, because Caruso had called ahead, and the nurse at the station already knew my name and pointed me down the hall without making me ask. Room 314. I stood outside the door for a moment. My hand was on the handle, and my heart was doing something irregular and loud inside my chest, and I thought about all the things I might say, and then I thought about the fact that there were no right words for this, that language was not built to carry 38 years and 8 months and everything in between, and so I stopped trying to find them, and I pushed the door open. The room was small and bright. Afternoon light came through the window, at an angle lying in a long rectangle across the floor. There was a chair beside the bed, a monitor with quiet numbers, a television mounted high on the wall that had been turned off. Evelyn was sitting up. She was thinner than I had ever seen her silver hair longer than she usually kept it, her wrists showing the faint marks of weeks in a small space. There was an IV line in her left arm and a hospital bracelet on her right wrist, and she had the careful, conserved stillness of someone who had learned not to use more energy than necessary. But her eyes. Her eyes were exactly as I had known them for 38 years. Dark brown and direct, and carrying that particular quality of attention that had always made me feel, from the first time she looked at me across a room in 1984, that she was seeing me more completely than anyone else ever had. She saw me in the doorway. Her mouth opened. No sound came out for a moment. Then she said, "My name, just my name, 1 syllable. Walt," and her voice broke on it completely, and I crossed the room in 4 steps and sat on the edge of the bed and gathered her into my arms as carefully as I knew how the way you hold something that has been through a great deal and needs to know it is safe now. She gripped the back of my jacket with both hands and pressed her face against my shoulder, and her whole body shook long, deep shudders that had been waiting a long time to be released, and I held on and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that mattered as much as just being there, solid and present and real. We stayed like that for a long time. When she finally pulled back, her face was wet and her eyes were red, and she looked at me with an expression I had no name for, relief and grief and fury and love all occupying the same space simultaneously, the way only people who have been through something together can look at each other. 8 months, she said. Her voice was rough. I kept telling myself you would figure it out, that you would find me. She pressed her palm flat against my chest over my heart. "Did you?" "Eventually," I said. My voice came out unsteady. "I'm sorry it took so long." Her hand curled into the fabric of my shirt. "You found me," she said. "That's what matters." She told me about the night she was taken the parking lot at Jamaica Station, 2 people she had not seen coming, a drive she had spent trying to memorize landmarks through a covered window, 8 months in a room in Hempstead that had a cot and a lamp and a small window too high to reach, food brought twice a day, 1 attempt to send a message through the man who delivered groceries he had taken it and never come back, and she had understood then that he was part of it. "I knew you hadn't forgotten me," she said. "Even when the weeks got long, I knew you. I never forgot you," I said. "They tried. It didn't work." She looked at my wrist, at the watch. She reached out and touched it with 2 fingers, the worn leather strap, the yellowed face, and her chin trembled once before she steadied it. "You kept it," she said. "I couldn't take it off," I said. "I didn't know why at the time. She looked up at me and almost smiled, the beginning of a smile, the shape of one which was enough for now. "I know why," she said. "We talked for 2 hours about Daniel." I told her everything, and she listened without interrupting, and when I finished she was quiet for a long moment, her hand in mine, her thumb moving across my knuckles. "He didn't know," she said finally. It was not a question. "He didn't know," I confirmed. "He made a bad choice for bad reasons, but he didn't know." "He came this morning," I said. "He came to the house, and he told me everything, and he stood in that room when it mattered." I looked at our hands. "That's not nothing." "No," Evelyn said. "It's not nothing." She leaned back against the pillows. "It'll take time." "Most things worth fixing do," I said. She laughed at that, a real laugh, quiet and a little hoarse, but real. The first time I had heard her laugh in 8 months and 2 days. Outside the hospital window, the November afternoon was fading into early dark. I held my wife's hand and listened to her breathe, and did not think about anything else for a long time. 3 weeks after the arrest, I drove to the Queens County Courthouse on Jamaica Avenue for the first time in my life. I did not go inside. I parked across the street in a lot that charged $12 for the first hour and sat in the truck with the engine off and watched people move in and out through the glass doors. Lawyers with rolling cases, families in their courthouse clothes, a court officer eating a sandwich on the front steps. Ordinary Tuesday morning business in a building where other people's worst moments got sorted into categories and assigned consequences. Daniel was inside. He had been there since 8:30 with his attorney, a woman named Karen Pellegrino, whom I had spoken to once on the phone and who had a calm, direct manner that I found reassuring without being able to say exactly why. The Queens County District Attorney's Office had offered Daniel a cooperation agreement 3 days after the arrest. In exchange for the offshore account information, the passwords, the routing codes, the 4 years of transaction history that gave federal investigators a complete map of Sandra and Marcus's operation. Daniel would plead guilty to a reduced charge of conspiracy in the 2nd degree, a Class E felony, with a sentence recommendation of 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and full financial restitution for any assets traceable to his involvement. Karen Pellegrino had explained it to me over the phone. In plain language, Daniel had provided substantial assistance to law enforcement at a critical moment. The information he brought that Tuesday morning had enabled the federal wire fraud case against Sandra, and Marcus had identified 4 prior victims whose assets were now in the process of being recovered, and had directly led to Sandra's full confession after her appointed counsel reviewed the offshore account evidence and concluded there was nothing left to contest. Under New York law, substantial assistance of that kind carried significant weight at sentencing. Daniel was not going to prison. I sat in the truck and thought about that. I was not sure how I felt about it. I had been turning the question over for 3 weeks, and I still did not have a clean answer. What Daniel had done, the silence, the choice to look away, the months of accepting Sandra's version of events, because it was easier than demanding the truth, had cost Evelyn 8 months of her life. That was not a small thing. It was not a thing that got erased by a good decision made at the last minute. But the last minute was still something. And Evelyn, who had more right than anyone to be the final word on this, had said what she said in the hospital room. "It'll take time, but he's still our son." At 9:47, my phone buzzed. A text from Karen Pellegrino: "Agreement accepted. He's coming out." I got out of the truck. Daniel came through the glass doors at 9:52, his attorney beside him, his tie loosened already, his face carrying the particular exhausted relief of someone who has been braced for impact and found the impact survivable. He saw me across the street and stopped walking. I crossed Jamaica Avenue. We stood on the sidewalk in front of the courthouse and looked at each other, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. And the sidewalk in front of the Queens County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning was not the place for most of it. Daniel's jaw worked. His eyes were red at the edges. "Dad, I know," I said. "I need to say it." His voice cracked on the last word, and he pressed his lips together hard and pulled himself back together with visible effort. I knew something was wrong, and I chose not to look at it. I chose the money, and I chose not to ask the questions I should have asked. And Mom spent 8 months in a room in Hempstead because of choices I made. His chin dropped to his chest. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I need you to know that I know what I did." I put my hand on my son's shoulder. He looked up. "Your mother wants to see you," I said. "She told me to tell you that herself." I held his gaze. "She said to bring lunch. She says the hospital food is terrible." Daniel made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, but lived somewhere in between the sound of a man discovering that the door he expected to find locked was still open. His hand came up and gripped my arm, and he nodded several times, quickly not trusting his voice. Karen Pellegrino said goodbye with a handshake and walked back toward the courthouse, and Daniel and I stood on the sidewalk as the Tuesday morning traffic moved past us on Jamaica Avenue. Buses and taxis and delivery trucks, the ordinary, unstoppable machinery of the city going about its business. "There's a diner on Hillside," I said. "Been there 40 years. Makes a decent club sandwich." Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." We walked to the diner together, and we sat across from each other in a booth by the window, and we talked for 2 hours about things that mattered and things that didn't. The way people do when they are feeling their way back toward each other, across difficult terrain, testing each step before they put their weight on it. It was not fixed. It was not going to be fixed quickly or easily, or without cost. But it was a beginning. And in my experience, a beginning is the only thing you actually need. May came to Queens the way it always does, suddenly without much warning. One morning, you wake up and the maple in the backyard has gone from bare branches to full green overnight, and the air through the window smells like cut grass and possibility instead of cold and waiting. I had been back in the workshop since March, not because there was urgent work to do. There was always work to do. There had been a backlog of commissions sitting untouched since the previous October, but because the workshop was where I had always done my clearest thinking, and there had been a great deal to think clearly about. Sandra Briggs had been sentenced 6 weeks earlier in federal court in Lower Manhattan. The judge, a woman in her 60s with the measured, unhurried manner of someone who had heard every possible version of human wrongdoing and had stopped being surprised by any of it, had given Sandra 14 years on the kidnapping conviction alone, with additional consecutive sentences for the wire fraud charges and the chemical elder abuse count. The federal prosecutor had described Sandra's operation as one of the most systematically predatory schemes targeting elderly Americans she had seen in 20 years on the bench. Marcus Webb had received 11 years. He had attempted to negotiate a cooperation agreement of his own, but had arrived at that decision approximately 48 hours too late. Daniel's information had already given investigators everything they needed, and Marcus had nothing left to trade. The 4 prior victims, whose assets had been routed through the Cayman Islands accounts, were in various stages of financial recovery. Gerald Patterson in Savannah, the man Frank had mentioned in Murphy's bar that first Friday night, the one now living in a state-funded facility, had been contacted by the federal recovery team. It would take time. Most things worth fixing did. I was thinking about all of this on a Tuesday morning in May, my hands moving on a piece of cherry wood, without my mind directing them, when I heard the back door open. Evelyn's footsteps crossed the yard. I knew them the way. I knew the sound of the workshop settling in the cold weather, the way I knew every voice that mattered to me, by the particular rhythm that belonged to no one else. She appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee, her silver hair catching the morning light, her color fully restored. Now the careful, conserved stillness of the hospital entirely gone. She looked like herself. She looked like 38 years of herself standing in my workshop doorway the way she had 10,000 times before. "Still at it?" she asked. "Almost done," I said. "This one's taken longer than it should." She crossed to the bench and set one mug on the corner, the left corner, where she always put it, where I could reach it without moving, and settled into her chair with the easy ownership of someone reclaiming a space that was always hers. She looked around the workshop the way she sometimes did, taking inventory of what had changed and what hadn't. Her eyes moved over the tools on their hooks, the lumber stacked against the far wall, the old transistor radio on the shelf above the window. Then they stopped on something on the corner of the bench. "Is that new?" she asked. She was looking at the piece of white oak, the one I had been working on, when everything began, the one I had set down the night the phone rang and not picked up again, until after Sandra Briggs was in handcuffs. I had finished it in March and mounted it on a small base. It was not a commission. It was not for sale. "Started it last October," I said. "Finished it in the spring." Evelyn leaned forward and looked at it more closely. The grain running clean and uninterrupted from one end to the other, the surface warm with oil, the wood showing every year of its life in the pattern of its rings. "It's beautiful, Walt," she said quietly. It had a long time to wait, I said. Sometimes that helps. She looked at me across the bench with an expression I recognized, the particular look she had when she understood that I was talking about more than one thing at once. She had always been better at that than I was, better at hearing what was underneath the words. She reached out and touched the surface of the oak with her fingertips lightly, the way you touch something you want to feel without disturbing. Frank called yesterday, she said. He and Rose are coming for dinner Saturday. She wants to bring something. Tell her she doesn't have to. I did. She's bringing something anyway. I almost smiled at that. Sounds right. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and looked out the north-facing window. At the May morning, the maple fully leafed out, now the neighbor's fence with the climbing roses just beginning to open the particular quality of Queen's light in spring that was different from any other light in any other place. Daniel called this morning, she said, early, before you were up. I kept my hands moving on the cherry wood. How did he sound? Better, she said. He found a job, an accounting firm in Flushing, small but honest. She paused. He asked if he could come for dinner Saturday too. I thought about the courthouse sidewalk 3 weeks ago, the sound Daniel had made when I told him his mother wanted to see him, the way he had gripped my arm. Tell him yes, I said. Evelyn looked at me. Then she nodded and picked up her coffee and said nothing more about it because we had been married for 38 years. And she knew as I did that some things do not need to be discussed further once the right decision has been made. The workshop was warm with the spring light. The cherry wood under my hands was coming to its finish, a few more passes, and it would be done ready to go to the neighbor on Merrick Boulevard who had commissioned it for her dining room. Outside, somewhere down the block, a mockingbird had taken up residence in the oak tree at the corner and was running through its repertoire at full volume, cycling through a dozen different songs without repeating itself. I reached for my coffee mug and drank from it, still the right temperature, still exactly the way I liked it. Walt, Evelyn said. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the white oak piece on the corner of the bench. Then she said, I thought about you every day, in that room. I thought he's in the workshop right now. He's doing exactly what he's always done. He's waiting, and he doesn't even know he's waiting. My hands stilled on the wood. I was waiting, I said. I just didn't know what for. She looked at me across the bench, and her eyes were bright, and she didn't say anything else, and neither did I, because the workshop was full of 38 years of mornings, just like this one, coffee and sawdust, and the particular silence of two people who know each other well enough to let the quiet speak for itself, and none of it needed to be said out loud to be completely, absolutely true. I picked up the sandpaper. Outside, the mockingbird started a new song. Sitting here in my workshop with the smell of sawdust and Evelyn's coffee still warm in my hand, I keep coming back to one thought. I almost lost everything not to a stranger, but to silence, my own silence, my willingness to accept what I was given without asking the hard questions. This is my family story, and the hardest part of it isn't what Sandra did. The hardest part is knowing that I let it happen slowly, one cup of tea at a time, because grief had made me easy to lead. Don't be like me. When something feels wrong, say it out loud. Write it down. Send it to someone you trust. God puts people in our lives, a friend like Frank, a neighbor like Rose, precisely for the moments when we can no longer see clearly ourselves. If this family betrayal taught me anything, it's that love is not passive. Protecting the people you love requires you to stay awake, ask questions, and trust the instinct that says something here is not right. I've learned that the deepest wounds in a family story don't always come from enemies. Sometimes they come from the people closest to us, and sometimes from our own silence. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in stories about resilience, truth, and fighting for the people you love, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories where this one came from. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Please note, future stories on this channel may contain fictionalized elements created for storytelling and educational purposes. If that's not the content you're looking for, we completely understand. Feel free to explore other options that suit you better.